Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War Frontline update for the 26th of June 2026. Let's get straight to it as it's a late one for me. This is the key to the map. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please pause the video and check that out now. We go to the front line and we can see that there might be some changes. I did this update quite a lot earlier today, probably about 6 hours ago or something, and there might well have been some changes. In fact, I've just added a Syriac Maps tweet they put out that could be, well, it definitely is a change to the map that I don't have here. Anyway, we'll start. Interestingly, well, this could have changed, but there were no deep state mapping updates, no Andrew Perpetua mapping updates. So these are only Syriac Maps. So it's arguably could be seen as a somewhat quieter day, but there are some changes there. Now, Trentelenko here says, if true, the Russian army's slow motion collapse from logistical starvation in Kharkiv is underway. What's he referring to? Well, this is a claim from a NAFO source that mass surrenders, desertions and collapse of some Russian units. If you have a few minutes and the patience to read the fine print, the analyst, that's the Russian source here, provides an assessment of how bad the situation is for Russia in Kharkiv. Let's just go through this, bearing in mind that, it's just one particular claim of the Kharkiv direction. Take it with a pinch of salt, all that kind of stuff. Right. Kharkiv, Russians surrender and desert in large numbers, with supplies short and food and water. Supplies short and food and water, a vastly reduced commodity even by Russian meager standards. Morale in their lines, especially in the Lipsy sector of the front, has been dire. This resulted in a rapidly increasing number of surrendering units. Ukraine had also been targeting the barrier troops and their headquarters, so that these were so reduced they were in no position to stop the Russians retreating without permission. Actually, I'm not sure this is a Russian source, not 100% sure actually who the analyst is here. So again, take it with even more of a pinch of salt. The first collapse came after the 7th Motor Rifle Brigade lost most of its forces and equipment during being forced into the meat grinder attacks against Ukrainian defences around Lipsy. They lost so many troops that the Russians had to withdraw them to reconstitute the unit, but they failed to be replaced with anything, leaving the remaining units feeling abandoned and vulnerable. Ukrainian counterattacks placed extreme pressure on the remaining units and they started to collapse. Russians have been conditioned into not surrendering in most cases, having been fed a bucket load of lies about what will happen to them, including torture, especially genital mutilation and eye removal. So they have often become too scared to try. Instead, they go AWOL, abandoning their positions and fleeing, especially without barrier troops to stop them. Okay. So remember this morning I talked about looking at all these different data points and saying that the Akhmat troops have been called in to be barrier troops. There are already claims of barrier troops in position as well. These were claims that come from Russians themselves. There was also talk about large-scale desertions, huge losses in the northern area, and that those were claims coming from both sides. Belgorod had a brimming hospital with lots of military patients, so on and so forth. So all of this fits with what we have already heard from other sources. The Chechens were brought in to try to restore some discipline, but instead seem to have ended up on the front line fighting, not Ukrainian but Russian troops trying to retreat without permission, so being the barrier troops. The Ukrainians quickly isolated where the Chechens were deploying from and targeted that, reducing their numbers and abilities in devastating HIMARS strikes inside Russia. Another thing that became clear over the past week is the pieces of units from all around the front have been stationed here. Platoon level numbers have been brought up from as far away as Kherson and pretty much everywhere along the front. Detached from their units and commanders, the Russian system doesn't really work well when it comes to communications and resupply, and becomes an every man for himself environment behind the lines, while being an incoherent and unstable front line, far from ideal to defend against determined Ukrainians. So just some more context there. What we'd also heard is that the Russians had been faring so badly that they brought reinforcements from the Donetsk front line, and the claim here is from Kherson. And the idea is that if you're bringing disparate reinforcements from platoons here, platoons there, then while you're bringing those extra personnel into these positions in Kharkiv, they aren't necessarily communicating coherently with each other, and that makes things even worse organizationally. And so, yes, you've got more humans, but actually things are worse. The situation has far from ideal defending against determined Ukrainians. The situation has resulted in Ukrainian gains and a reduction in Russian-held territory. Ukraine has opted for the attrition strategy, wearing the Russians out of equipment and progressively weakening them, forcing them to keep deploying new units where they can contain them rather than have them exploit a frontline position elsewhere. So something to say about that is that in these two areas, I suppose these are quite contained areas. You know where you're fighting, and that's the idea, is that you are holding them here and attriting them, and they can't sort of go elsewhere. In fact, they're being brought into this attritional cauldron, if you like. Eventually, it's hoped they will become so weakened that an offensive retake will retake all of the captured areas, and that will be possible. Yet rumours persist that the Russians still want to expand the front lines here to create their so-called buffer zone. If they can't even maintain what they have without bringing in units from around the entire front, how will they create enough of a force to widen the operation, let alone stabilize their own front in Kharkiv? This farce of an operation has been catastrophically bad for the Russians. They have locked themselves into it and don't have the humility or common sense to see this is no longer a viable campaign. In other words, this is a sunk cost fallacy, chasing bad money with good. One of the key aspects of being a good military force commander is knowing when you are wrong and accepting it. That doesn't happen in Russia without severe consequences. They are too afraid to admit failure. Kharkiv continues to be a death zone for Russian units in an area where the commanders are seemingly nervous of new ideas or any common sense, resorting to brutal tactics to control their forces. Okay, so their own forces. So that is a Ukrainian source. Sorry for the lack of clarity at the beginning there, but that's a Ukrainian source, so it will potentially be biased towards the Ukrainian point of view, but it does fit in line with everything we have been hearing concerning what is going on in these two areas. Now, Surrey Maps does have a small piece of a small area that the Russians have advanced, and this is in the area concerning that aggregates plant that has been supposedly surrounded, as according to others. In fact, I've just heard more news about that recently, that some are saying 200, some are saying dozens of. Whether that's that the 200 have been reduced now to dozens, I don't know. But what Surat Maps is proposing here goes against those claims and what both Deep State Maps and Andrew Perpetua are claiming as is the case around here. So potentially more territory for the Russians there, but highly unlikely that is the case from what we have otherwise gathered. Then it goes on down the front line. So that's the end for the Vovchansk and the Lipsy area there. No change to the more westerly salient. Then when we come down to the northeastern axis from Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea, we can see that there are potentially some gains for the Russians along the Sinkivka area. We saw previously there were some slight gains. I think it was a Deep State Map, maybe it was this little area there. Well, actually now Surat Maps has increased the gains. They had this area up to there, that sort of rectangle, has increased the gains to the Russians along a tree line just to the east of Sinkivka. But there are also other claims that the Russians are pushing just to the east of Sinkivka as well. So if we look at NOL reports here, new geolocated footage confirms Russian advances east of Sinkivka. While failing to attack the city from the north, Russia is now trying to encircle it from the east with minor success. In other words, they've had a real issue coming through the forest area here. Remember, Surat Maps had the Russians in control of most of Sinkivka and a lot of this area here. They then subsequently took those claims back to where we see them now. Still quite a bit of difference between all three mappers north of Sinkivka, but that hasn't changed for some time. Just the odd little bit here and there to the east of Sinkivka, but it could be that the Russians have picked up the momentum there, because as you can see from NOL reports, some increased activity there, recent Russian gains supposedly to the east of Sinkivka. And indeed, Global War Monitor adds Russian forces from the 25th Motorized Rifle Brigade, have taken positions from the 30th Mechanized Brigade, 2nd Battalion of Ukraine, east of Sinkivka in the Kharkiv Oblast. And that's more widespread area of control there. That's literally all of this area there, as according to Global War Monitor, but take that with a pinch of salt. And then Surat Maps had the claim that during the last 48 hours, the Russian army made new advances south of Vilshana. So that is just that tree line I was talking about earlier. And then as we come further to the south now, along that northeastern axis, coming down to just west of Svatova there, we have the attack that's supposed to be going towards Borova. I don't know if this is part of it. Don't know, well, A, whether it's happening at all, B, exactly where that is coming from, or whether it's anywhere along here that provides a weakness and exploiting that to move westwards. But we have Kolomyr-Chika area, the Russians making some gains towards Stelmakivka, getting right to the outskirts of that town now, as according to Surat Map. So that is a challenge for the Ukrainians. The first houses of Stelmakivka are under Russian control. Again, though, that is just Surat Maps saying that, no other sources confirming that yet. And indeed, they say that the Russian army has managed to reach the first houses of Stelmakivka. So there you go. That's what's happening there. Then when we come down further to the south, we can see no change to any of the front line, really, until we get much further to the south. So no changes around the Serebryansky forest, no changes around the Seversk front line, around Bakhmut either. However, I will say that this has just come out from Surat Map. So this might be an area that has just been gained by the Russians. If we go and look at exactly where that is, that's north of Bakhmut, around the Rozdalivka area. So you've got that, I guess, the sort of rectangular area where the Russians don't control. Is it there that they have gained? Yes, it does appear to be the case. And indeed, Surat Maps is now claiming they're halfway through Rozdalivka there by the looks of it. So situation on the Eastern Front, they say during the last 3 days, the Russian army's managed to capture most of the locality of Rozdalivka. That wouldn't surprise me. There have been lots of claims about Rozdalivka over the past few days, and some saying that it is very much under a lot of pressure at the moment. So they could have taken that. Is that a huge loss for the Ukrainians? I mean, no, it's one town of a string of towns going north towards the Seversk area. I don't think it's like hugely problematic, but I guess any territory that they lose makes it more difficult for them to take back, because they eventually have to take it back. But I don't think it has particular strategic value. Still, Russians pushing in a number of places that they weren't previously. Now, no change to the Chaziv Yar front line, and that's good news for the Ukrainians. Just worth noting that it is not a very safe place. If you look at that, Chaziv Yar, yet another Popasna, Bakhmut, and many other destroyed frontline cities. This is one of a whole series of photographs that are so evocative and heartbreaking that this was once a functioning town in Ukraine, and then a couple of years into war, this is what liberation looks like. Just it's awful, isn't it? You know, each one of these windows, each one of these balconies was a family's home, was somebody's property, and now that's what it's reduced to. It's an absolute disgrace. Absolute disgrace. Imagine you lived there and this was put on you against your will. You know, that's what we're dealing with. Anyway, that is Chaziv Yar. So no change to that sector, or indeed anywhere even past New York and Toretsk. So that's good news for the Ukrainians, that Russians have not made further gains there. No gains along Avdiivka either, and Krasnohorivka, Mariinka, Novomykhailivka. The only other changes to the entirety of the front line are down by Mikilska, really, in the Vuhledar area, where the Russians appear to be pushing in this corner by the quarry area south of Solodka, where Surret Maps is essentially catching up with the other maps. So Deep State and Andrew Perpetua had these areas already under the Russian control from previously, and now Surret Maps is catching up with that, and they're all pretty much agreeing, give or take the odd field here and there, that the Russians have made some gains there over the recent days. But no change to Velika Novoselka, to Robotina. In fact, Robotina's had very little activity very little gain for either side in the last, I guess, 2 or 3 weeks, and that's really good news for the Ukrainians, because that the Russians were starting to get a bit of momentum there. No change to the Dnipro River area either. So that's the frontline update, but it might be marginally out of date. Some things could be added to that. As we can see, Surret Maps has already changed this area by Rozdilivka since I did the update. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Press that bell. Subscribe to the channel. Make sure when you do press the bell that the drop down menu, the selection all rather than personalized, I think it is the beneficial one to have. But thank you for being along, for watching along with me. Take care, and I'll speak to you tomorrow.